Creativity. What a powerful force. To be alive, connected. Often not so easy. We'd all like to have more creativity in our lives, in our professions, to create new things, but better yet, to be creativity, to feel the flow. We've seen others have it. Da Vinci, Mozart, Einstein. But me? Well, I'm not wired that way. Oh, I'm too old. That's for kids. What will people think? Some say it can't be taught. Others say you can develop it. And then others say it's a natural part of us all. We just have to learn to let it out. In this film, you will go on a journey. You will meet some of the leading experts in the field of creativity. Neuroscientists, psychologists, life coaches, Zen monks, artists, teachers, healers, and more. We explore 4 pathways into creativity. We begin with the rational, the focused energy. We then proceed through the emotional and intuitive realms, and finally entering into the spiritual, creative, awakened awareness. What combination will unlock your creativity? This is all about cracking your creativity code. Let the journey begin.
We are born to be spontaneous and creative. From the beginning of human life, we have sung and danced and made art. It's all our lifeblood. It's our cultural and personal heritage. And right now, more than ever, we really need to help heal ourselves and the planet by being creative.
Creativity certainly has benefits to the survival of man. We have to be very creative in coming up with solutions to problems in life, and we have to be able to do it suddenly at times if we're presented with a threat. So creativity is one of the great human characteristics that has helped our survival, and we are wired to be creative.
One of the most commonly held stereotypes when people are thinking about creativity is they tend to think about creative geniuses like the Bachs and the Einsteins of the world. And indeed, what's missed is the other kind of creativity that everyone shares. Each of us is creative every day. So there's a distinction between what's called the big C creativity, and that's the kind of creativity that tends to denote these creative geniuses. On the other hand, there's little c creativity, which is the everyday kind of creativity. For example, when you came here today, you may have taken a different route. You may have thought of a new idea, a new way to prepare your coffee in the morning. Each one of these minor creative acts is also part of creativity. There's always a yin and a yang of brain activity that's involved in generating creative products. So on the one hand, we need to be able to free ourselves from our habits in order to do things that are truly new and different. We need to find alternative connections and different kinds of ways of thinking to create things that are really new. At the same time, this has to circle back and be recognized as fitting with something for it to satisfy the usefulness criteria. So this constant dynamic between flexibility on the one hand and stability on the other hand. A flexible process of getting out a lot of ideas, then a stabilizing plan of finding the connections and gluing things together. This is a constant cycle of activity that's ongoing in the brain, and that's what I think is the key to the creative product, is finding the right balance of flexibility and stability and using them fluidly together.
Creativity involves communication between brain regions. And that communication is going to be highly dependent upon white matter tracts in the brain, the functional connections, connectivity in the brain. The corpus callosum is one of those very critical white matter regions. It connects the 2 hemispheres of the brain. And I think many of us think that that kind of very deep connection must be a part of the creative process because it's so integral to putting together information and integrating information together. And the other area that is always the case must be in the frontal lobes. The frontal lobes are they go beyond what's right in front of us. The frontal lobes allow us to see that which is not explicit in front of us. It allows us to predict. And so those are critical for any creative activity.
Our brains, amazing neural pathways of connectivity. But pathways can become ruts. You know that 95% of our thoughts are routine? But they don't have to be. We can choose behaviors that lay down new, creative pathways.
Patterns. We all have a way of showing up to life, and it becomes a routine. We do our day a certain way. We do our week and our month and our year a certain way. And so if you're running patterns in your life that are not conducive to creativity, what I would suggest is interrupting that pattern.
So really bringing creativity into your daily life and trying to do something different every time you're faced with a decision. What do I do now? Let's try something different. Let's eat at not the restaurant I eat at every night. Let's eat at something that's completely different. Challenging yourself with novelty is a great way to foster creativity.
Generativity, just the ability to produce stuff, turns out to be the best predictor of creative achievements. So one example of generating a lot of stuff is the typical kind of brainstorming activity. So this is a very common group exercise done in businesses and in academic think tanks, and that is to try to get as many ideas out as possible without worrying right away about fleshing them out, but just getting them out there. If you can't keep things in mind, most people can only keep in mind about 7 things, and that's on the high end. By externalizing things on a computer program or on a blackboard or a Post-it board, then you can externalize the information and manipulate it and use that as an external device to support working memory functioning and go beyond your brain.
A collage is a great way of putting up many, many different concepts and seeing them simultaneously. Seeing them simultaneously allows you to make connections between this and that, which normally would never go together. And that's what creativity is. In the brain, it's integrating the left hemisphere language centers with the right hemisphere face centers, or perhaps with some visual scene, visual imagery centers that are represented in your parietal lobe, having that information cross the callosum and converge together in your frontal cortex, particularly in the inferior frontal cortex.
Laughter is a great way to become more creative. It opens us up again, it frees us. When we're looking at comedy, we're very often putting unusual things side by side, and that triggers the mind to think about combinations in new ways. Creativity, I think, is at its heart, combinations of things in new or different ways.
Exposure to other kinds of disciplines can be helpful. So for example, a visual artist who exposes themselves to musical influences, or scientists who reach out to another adjacent discipline or a distant discipline and try to take the messages from that discipline and apply it to their own work. These are the kinds of things that have been seen in history as fostering scientific revolutions. It's relatively rare that people come up with ideas that have never been thought of before in any context. Instead, what is much more common is that people will see something in another area and then borrow the idea and bring it in to an area where it's never been used before, thus generating a completely new perspective on a previous domain of knowledge.
Sloppy success is better than perfect mediocrity. So get busy in your creation and getting rid of limiting beliefs about yourself, like I'm not good enough, I don't deserve it, I can't do it, I'm not enough, I'm bad. All of these limiting beliefs we have that came from our childhood that block us from actually making affirmative decisions because we're not sure, based on those beliefs, if the decision we're making is going to be the right one. In creativity, there's no wrong or right. It's your life. It's your creation, not theirs.
When it comes to engaging a creative life, we all struggle at times with fear and procrastination in doing that. There's a sense of resistance to it. And part of it is that the mind kind of creates a model that's kind of like a mountain for what we need to engage, and it seems overwhelming. And so part of the work is to engage small things with great love. And what that does is we can break down what the tasks are that we actually need to do, that is involved in whatever this creative project is. And we can engage each task as if it's all on its own and with a sense of caring about that task. Not only does that shrink the overwhelm that's in the mind, but it engages a part of our heart that's, again, connected with a sense of saying yes to life.
Key part of mastering the craft is to make it so that the components of the action are completely automatic. Once those components are completely automatic, then they can be strung together in unique and novel ways. I think that one of the key things to achieve that state in whatever domain one's trying to achieve it is to have such extensive practice and experience in that domain that one can execute the steps of it flawlessly. So I think this has been well demonstrated in all kinds of performance arts, where some have said, like Malcolm Gladwell, that you've got to have your 10,000 hours in before you will become a world expert at anything. And I think it's this process of automatization that enables the key execution of the activity to go to a deeper brain level. And your cortex, the higher thinking parts of your brain, are not necessary at all to execute the act. So this could be true for a violinist who's executing a particular bow movement, a dancer who's executing a particular dance movement, or a scientist who's performing certain logical steps in experimental design. I think to foster creativity, one has to have an open mind. One has to be willing to violate conventions and do things differently than the way they've been done before. But I think without the consistent, driven, motivated application of effort, most people will not generate a lot of creative products.
It's a process of failure. I mean, it is. And I think most people, they don't realize quite, I think, how much failure goes into something. And how much the writing process itself is about just failing. I mean, just on the day-to-day level. Every day begins with looking at what I did the day before. First moment is almost always bad. Usually I'll work on a computer, but sometimes actually just looking at the screen, going over and over and over again at a particular few pages, you get a little ill. I'll actually print out some few pages every couple weeks or so, and then work strictly on the page, because just simply seeing it in a different form will just get you a little less clouded.
A big thing I do is I move things elsewhere. Because you are following the trajectory of a certain character. So if something is now on page 48, let's say, it doesn't feel right here because he hasn't quite earned that line.
It's like a puzzle where you have a lot of pieces in place, but they're not all there. You know, you have to flesh it out. The character wouldn't say it, there's something wrong. Sometimes it's something as simple as one word. It can be as simple as a preposition in the wrong, it's something that simple. Okay, I have another idea. I don't know what I'm gonna do with it yet. Mark that down somewhere. And you have like a sort of list. This is where that line should fit. Trying to approach it from different angles with the rhythms of a particular line. Do is put in another line of response, and then that line needs to be responded to. Some lines just are bad, and you just have to get rid of them for good. It's all about hearing what that character wants to say. Just everything isn't there yet. Crash and momentum, which is, again, is the biggest thing I think in a play. You know, it just won't work. Going back, checking if it works, doesn't work, go back again, boom, boom. And that's basically what a day is. And then as that goes on, I'll know I'll have something. But I think the key is just you have to just push through whatever it is. I mean, it's really it's no different, I think, than an athlete would deal with, or a runner, for instance, would deal with. I mean, there's a perseverance that you have to have because you're constantly going to be faced with things that aren't working.
Wish us to interrupt them?
While they are preoccupied.
The hardest part, of course, is seeing that this thing that you've created and you thought was finished is, of course, being interpreted in different ways and is going in different directions. And there are times you want to stand up and say, no, that's not what you sound like. You don't sound like that. But you can't control all that. And the key with all of this is you have to keep pushing it forward. If you've made the decision to write, you have to make the decision to show that writing to other people. And even the greatest works of literature are rejected by certain people. Go home, that was nonsense. People walk out of Hamlet and saying that guy's a total idiot, and like, if that fails, then you are going to fail in that sense. You're constantly going to have that, and so you have to submit it. You have to submit it to contests. You have to show it to your friends, and you have to be able to embrace criticism and embrace rejection and failure. You have to do it, otherwise you really should do something else. Trying, in a sense, as you work to make your own life fuller, and you do want to make that individual, you want to make their lives full. You want to add something to a life, because I think that sense of stagnation that people often feel, that heaviness, that load, you want to put something in there that doesn't make them better, really, but it makes them fuller in a certain sense. And I think that becomes the audience. How can I add something? How can I make a life fuller?
On the rational path, we were experimenting, editing, combining. There was a path of both patience and persistence. But it is in the emotional realm that holds so much power over whether we are blocked or inspired. Let's enter the emotional realm and see what obstacles we may need to navigate.
I believe that to shame and repress people's creativity is a very destructive act. And it can be destructive of the soul as well as the spirit as well as the body.
In our school systems now, there's a great deal of emphasis on a one-size-fits-all model, that there's an average ideal that every child should aspire to, and teachers work very hard to try to get from students the one answer that's correct, the one thing that they want to hear. They're very concrete and one-on-one in trying to get children just to fill in the blanks that the teacher wants them to fill out. And effectively, that is what stifles creativity in children. What we really want to be able to do is to ask children open-ended questions and to have them think through problems and to reward them for coming up with novel solutions and things that the teacher hasn't thought of. This is what teachers discourage children from doing, and it's exactly what they need to encourage children to do. I think there's the same kind of dynamic in a workplace situation where you have a hierarchical structure, a boss in charge, people who want to please the boss, and the tendency is always to say what they think the boss wants to hear. And bosses, unfortunately, grow up in that system as well, and they want to be validated, and they don't want some young smart aleck telling them something that they haven't thought of or telling them that they might be wrong. But that's exactly what you have to do if you want to foster new ideas and creative ideas.
We are so used to this concept that we have to do or we're going to be lazy. We have to do or we're going to fail. We have to do or we're going to die. This is not the way people lived on the planet throughout history. It's a very much post-industrial revolution idea. And it's become just radical in our times.
We're all subject, particularly with advancing technology, to a lot of noise coming in from the environment. Almost all of us have cell phones that are constantly ringing, receiving text messages, we're being tweeted, we're getting pinged on Facebook. All of these demands are coming in. And most people today would probably benefit from time that's unplugged pursuing things that are purely physical, purely sensory, and away from their connected devices.
We're valued by how much we're doing. You know, even to be on a vacation is to be doing things. What are you doing for your vacation? You know, whereas really what we need is to just be. And when we're being, we're receptive.
It's important to have a bit of time away from the kids and discipline yourself on that. When I say that, maybe half an hour, where you do something where you let the day go. You allow the day to process itself. So when I came in and had a very busy time, the projects and the centre were still running through my head. I would sit down in the chair and not watch the TV, not have any music or input, just allow the mind to settle, drink a cup of tea or, you know, juice or something. And then after that half an hour, things in general had settled. And then it was easier to deal with whatever came next. If the mind is so full of stuff it never gets processed, then all that happens is with more TV or internet or radio or newspapers, iPod, you know, the whole list is that it just creates more and more sort of stuff that isn't processed, which creates stress. And then to a certain degree it blocks the creative process too, because it's harder to see clearly.
It's tough to be creative in today's culture. A shaming education. You have to be compliant at work. The 24/7 connected culture. We can unplug, at least for short periods. But have you ever noticed when you get quiet, inside your mind gets louder? Who's in there? What's there? Thoughts. Thoughts about thoughts. Feelings. Thoughts about feelings, feelings about feelings. No wonder it's so hard to let our creativity out.
You might say that creativity is destabilizing to the ego, because when you're creative and when you're aware, you're reaching outside of the confines of what the ego says who you are and what you can and can't do, and the fears that kind of enact through the ego. And you're looking outside of that and seeing a broader perspective.
Because of all the things that have occurred over all the years of our lives, we have these negative self-concepts that lead us to find proof that we're not enough. So we've been collecting proof that we're not enough over the years. And you would think, you know, it's so nonsensical, why would we do that? But our defenses really make a lot of sense. They're made to protect us. They're made to protect us from stepping out too far and being shamed or being embarrassed. They're made to keep us from going into places and becoming intimate with someone where we might get hurt or disappointed. They do make sense. But the problem is they also keep us stuck in. So they both protect us and they also insulate us from our lives. You go further where you really realize how limiting your self-beliefs are. And you start actually kind of getting pissed off at them, like you're kind of had enough.
We sabotage ourselves a lot of time because we're trying to avoid that rejection. We're trying to avoid criticism. We're trying to avoid feeling uncomfortable. It is very uncomfortable to create something and then have it open in the world. Everyone's a critic, right? People are great ones for commenting and saying whether it's good or bad or useful or not. And the truth is, we're not really supposed to pay attention to that. In the act of creation, we're just supposed to bring it through.
Other people often have opinions. You know, when we start doing creative work, we want everyone to, you know, be there cheering us on and saying, you know, that's so great that you're doing that work and that you're connecting and it's beautiful. But people can get very triggered by that. It's very threatening sometimes. It makes other people, you know, feel their own wounds, feel their own stuckness, feel their own I should.
Enjoy it for yourself and do it for yourself, and then see what might come of it.
we can always come up with 1,000 reasons why we need to clean the toilet or make that phone call or walk the dog rather than sit down and do the work. And I think we all know that that's because feelings come up, uncomfortable feelings come up, that we want to resist. The first thing I say about procrastination is honor it. Do not judge yourself about it. Do not start a whole critique of yourself based on what's wrong with me, I procrastinate. Accept it. Change it into the question of, I wonder why I don't want to do this.
I think there's a process that happens when we're allowing ourselves to be in a place of curiosity versus being judgmental. Judgment is based on things that we have been taught, things that we might know, but things that actually may not be relevant to us anymore. And if we engage with curiosity, then we're opening to other things. We're in a neutral place saying, what is this? Let me explore this. Let me see what I can make of this or do with this.
There's a word that oftentimes comes up in our mind, which is the word should. I call this word a mind trap, because what this word does is it, in some ways, pours kerosene on the fire of our stress. And we already have stress about needing to do something, engage a certain project, write something, whatever it is creatively that we're trying to do. There's already maybe some sense of procrastination or some kind of resistance to it for whatever the reason is. And then we say to ourselves, I should do this right now. I should be doing more of this. And what ultimately that is the sense of stress. Stress pouring on an already stressful state doesn't necessarily lead to motivation. There's a classic stress curve that happens, which is a little bit of stress is motivating. We reach to a certain point, and when the stress gets to too much, then it becomes not only demotivating, but we try to resist it more automatically. And the should, I should be doing more of this, creates more of that stress, so actually works against moving forward with what we're trying to accomplish.
If you keep at something, and it doesn't have to be with a, sort of forced start, but just to enjoy what you're doing and learn from it, then different oblique ways of approaching your art begin to come through, and it becomes easier to create. That's not to say that creative, blocks don't come in, but then you find a way, and it's like koans. Sometimes it's just like you don't know what to do, and then you find a way.
An introvert will generally need to go and be quiet with themselves. A more extroverted person might need to get out and about with people and noise to be inspired.
Both solitude and brainstorming are valid ways to come up with new creative expressions, and that might vary with the individual, and it might vary with the situation as well. And probably they should never be thought of as being mutually exclusive. Some individuals do well when they're by themselves, they can generate ideas and they don't feel hampered by the constraints of the people around them. Others can bounce their ideas off of somebody else, maybe someone who can help constrain their ideas in a way that's productive, or at least to be able to say whether that's going to be useful or not. There are some creative individuals who are really great at coming up with many, many novel ideas, many novel solutions to problems, but maybe only a few of them will be practical. Sometimes those people can do well by teaming with a more practical, maybe less creative person who can say, well, this will work, but this one won't. And those are really powerful teams if you can build those.
So a lot of times people think that they're so imperfect that they can't possibly be creative or talented or brilliant or glorious, but the truth is that needs must is kind of a phrase where I come from, necessity being the mother of invention. So if a person goes through really tough times, the brain itself has to open and create some solutions and has to look at things in a different way. And when the trauma has passed, we're left with the gift of those openings and the brain actually working in ways that are actually more creative. So some of the most creative people in our society today are the ones who've been through the most, trauma victims, maybe even people who've had a touch of substance abuse or who are in recovery. And sometimes we judge ourselves because of what we have to do to soothe and comfort ourselves, so that on the other side of it, we're not so able to bring that creativity through, to bring that beauty through, that we can actually contribute.
You know, whether it's that moment that you break down in tears, or whether it's, you know, the reaction you have in disappointment, there are times when that facade cracks for everyone. And I think as an artist, that's what you're looking for. You're looking to allow yourself to open, to allow that false self to dissolve.
I think that the most important thing that we can do to encourage creativity is to let people know that their inhibitions can go away and it's okay, that they can come up with a new idea and be wrong, and that's okay. If we are comfortable with the idea of coming up with an idea that's not good, then we will be comfortable with coming up with many ideas, one of which may potentially be very, very good and very creative.
Just go for it. Just take the risk. The payoff is so much greater than any of the pain you will go through. You know all the messy parts, you know all the parts that are uncomfortable, but you embrace them, you realize your neighbor has them, your husband has them, your brother has them, and you allow it. And you allow that, and you don't use that as an excuse to remain defended and remain away and apart.
I don't have a TV.
I think art is something that moves you emotionally. You know, to feel sad, to feel disgusted, to feel anything. But if it doesn't move you emotionally, it's not art, it's craft. It's very cathartic, you know, very meditative. And I don't do this, then I'm less productive, less creative. Gives me time to sit back and think, you know, subconsciously think about what I'm trying to accomplish in other areas. And then I tend to work smarter when I come out of this. You know, art is a true expression of one's own individuality. You come in here and do the ceramic books and do it function perfect, just, you know, letter perfect to technique and whatever. What is that? Anybody else do that. Anybody else can do that reading the same book. But when you put your heart into it, and you commit your personality, commit your likes to it, your dislikes, you get bold enough to really pour that in there, where you can't do that in a lot of social situations. It starts becoming art. It just starts becoming something that you really feel a piece of the person in. You really see the person's personality in. And it's daring, and it requires a lot of courage. And I love it. I love seeing people get that courage.
So that first exercise was a lot of fun, with just kind of freewheeling, going where it goes, seeing what I get. But I liked it for certain things, and I didn't like it for certain reasons. I like it, I don't like it, like it, don't. So what I did is I didn't like that it was squat, and wide and chunky. So what I did is made taller cylinders. This one was just kind of, I made it tall, and then I started altering it into a woman shape. And it was kind of a nice surprise because it collapsed on me. But what I did was manipulate the collapse into what it is now, which I like it. But let me show you the next one, which is more along the lines of where I wanted to go. Well, this is what I had visioned. It was something taller, simpler, cleaner, smoother. Still, I see the cleanness here, and it's still a lot simpler, but a little busier here. So could I do something to split that? Because this makes me feel good. This one makes me feel good. This one I'm like kind of, and then this last piece splits the difference. I think art is something that moves somebody emotionally, and I wanted kind of a smooth, kind of fun, nice feel. I have a feeling about finishing. I mean, some people never finish, and all they do is always immerse themselves in the doing, and that's fine. But for me, I like to finish. I like to have something done, get a feeling of completion, satisfaction, finished, over, and then move on to something else. I think everybody has the ability to be an artist, and I got a lot of satisfaction out of doing it. I had some good times. I got to relax and make art, and that's what it's all about.
Art making and creative expressions help us process and integrate our emotions. And as we become clearer, we're ready for guidance through the intuitive realm.
We don't create with our rational minds. We create with some part of us that is so much wiser. And then maybe we need to use our rational minds in order to put it in a package for the marketplace or whatever we need to do. But that original spontaneous creation has got to be let to flow in a million rivers, a million directions.
If you could tap into your senses, in other words, if you could instantly become aware of what you're feeling, the temperature in the room, the clothing on your body, the watch on your wrist, which you don't realize you're wearing it until I bring it to your attention, the socks on your feet, those types of things. Those feelings are happening now. Your senses are always giving you information about right now. Your mind is giving you information about the past or the future, which you're making up anyway.
A lot of people may notice internal dialogues and chatter that's going on almost all the time. By attending to and listening to music, it may cause us to entrain our thoughts to a totally different dimension that's free of this verbal dialogue and narrative that's going on in the background, and help to bring in other ideas.
If we can shut up our verbal minds, stop talking to ourselves for a minute, and let our minds go free, which is I think often what we do in meditative states, that allows our right hemispheres to flourish. And there are a lot of ideas floating around those right hemispheres that often don't come to consciousness unless we let them out and give our verbal brain a break. One side of the brain tends to inhibit the other side. If we're talking, we tend to inhibit the rest of the brain. And so not talking is a very good activity because it lets the rest of the brain rise and do its thing for a while.
First things that come to mind are usually not the most creative. As you dig deeper, quiet yourself and really search more extensively, then you're more likely to come up with creative and unusual products.
Journaling is a really valuable tool where it's a practice of setting aside time, and you can even consider it sacred time, right? Time that's set aside for a particular important task that lets you connect your internal world with the external world. And to do that on a regular basis is a way to be exercising your creativity.
Our brains are biased towards the negative. They're just going to tilt that way, and it's good. It's okay to accept that's just the way it is. So one of the things we can do is when we're laying down at bed at night, is we can reflect back. And part of this is priming our minds to actually see this in our daily life, but we can reflect back to say, where was the good today? Where was the good today? And see if you can kind of tease out moments. Where were the good moments today? This kind of helps neutralize the inner critic. But when we practice and repeat at night, saying, where is the good today? Not only are we likely to have a better night's sleep, but we're priming our minds to actually see it in the moment when it's happening, the good, which is self-reinforcing, which again is connected to feeling more open, connected to more potential, possibility, which are all completely aligned with being creative.
The last 30 minutes of your nightly process before you go to sleep, begin to think about what it is you wish to create. Turn off the news, turn off the television. Don't take that negativity with you into your sleep state. You always want to fall asleep in a very positive state. We're working with our dreams and working with our dream state to help us be more creative and to bring us guidance and ideas. So one tip is to keep a notepad by your bed. And when you wake up, or you wake up in the middle of the night, immediately write down what it is you were dreaming about, or the thought or the idea or the guidance you received in your dream. Because if you wake up and get up in the morning and walk around the house, you'll forget. So definitely keep a journal, a dream journal by your bed.
It certainly is true that periods of incubation are critical, probably by laying down patterns of brain activity, which only subsequently will be assembled together in unique ways. It may be that some time is beneficial for a certain idea to really be focused on, then let alone for a while other kinds of connections can then begin to be forged to that original idea.
Anything can be a creative channel for us. Our dream life can be a creative channel. Taking a walk can be a creative channel. Our senses are giving us information at all times. And if we allow ourselves to have the intention of tapping into these creative channels, then we can begin to use them or activate them for our own creative expression, our personal creative expression.
I paint. Sometimes I paint with paint, sometimes I paint with photographs, sometimes I paint with whatever's laying around, whatever I see in my everyday world. But eventually I come in here and I'm painting. When I walk in, those first few moments, the first things that are coming to me, I'm connecting to that intuition that's directing me which way to go. If I'm too controlled and thinking about what I'm seeing or trying to make a picture, I'm in trouble. I love the paint. I love what that paint can do. I love the confidence in brush stroke making. And I get excited over it. I really viscerally respond to exciting paint. There has to be a kind of a presence there. And when I feel that's happening and it's ambiguous, it's organic, it's just from doing it that you know. It's an inner knowing, this inner life when you think that's right. Sometimes it's, gee, I think that's pretty cool. One asks, where do you get your inspiration? Well, it's all around us, everywhere. The square, whole, empty space in here with the color and the space, the light, the air that's contained within this space. It's all here for us to see. It's just a new way of seeing and really seeing and considering your own, take a walk around your own house. You know, I'm dealing with the shapes and the colors, and I'm thinking about the overall connection from each area to each area. It's kind of reflective of everything I've thought about in terms of how, you know, technically we're all sort of connected with each other. But I'm not trying to make a landscape. I'm really completely dedicated and excited about what the paint is actually doing here. When you're actually in the doing of it, is when the creativity takes place, and it's kind of just a release and a let go. And if you're lucky, you have those certain moments that are really euphoric and transcendent, if you will. If I'm not working on my art, I might create some drama in my life because I tend to want the drama, the theater, and I think life, you know, art imitates art in life. So as long as I'm working, my life is usually pretty boring and my art is very exciting. At least that's the hope. I don't want things static. The higher creative places are inside of you. The thoughts that you have when you're working, they stay in the painting. It becomes a kind of a mind map, a conversation with my inner self, my inner soul. I want my audience to leave satisfied that you have had some kind of experience or presence. And so if I'm being true to myself in when I'm working, hopefully that will translate somehow. A person walks out of an art museum and just feels overall better about the everyday world, that there's something more here than what we see in the physical world. There is something beyond it, and that's one of the wonderful contributions of art. I'm having an awful lot of fun. I'm looking at this crazy world we live in that we all take so darn seriously, and I'm having fun with it.
We see how personal creativity encourages our well-being and our connectedness. There's one more path into the spiritual realm. We no longer create in the world. Now, through trust, the world creates us. Creativity becomes the unifying force of all that is, and you are part of all that is.
It's really profound that whether it's in the Zen tradition or in the Christian tradition or in the Sufi tradition, there's a way of invoking beginnings of things. In Arabic they say Bismillah, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of the divine compassionate, may it begin. In other words, may I be a vehicle for the divine compassion in whatever I'm doing today. You get out of bed saying that. A Christian would say, may God's will be done. In the name of God it begins. That was an old greeting in France and Spain of how the day begins. In the name of God it begins. Many people, before they ever put their hand to a painting or a book or anything, prayed, thy will be done. May I be filled with God's grace. The Buddhists do the same thing in the sense of the act of centering, the act of breathing out me, breathing out my ego, breathing out what I think, and then letting the emptiness fill me.
If I'm grateful for things, I tend to use the opportunity or the resources that I have well, you know, if I have that chance. In terms of prayer or asking the universe, is that usually the first thing I do is I give thanks for what I have. You know, because I'm really pleased with the life that I have, you know, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity. So that's the first thing, and then there's other things I would like to happen for myself and others, but that's secondary. I have so much already.
I think the irony is that many of us begin with this creative desire or these creative thoughts and ideas with our ego, wanting to create something really great. And yet, the ironic part is that for us to bring something great through, we have to drop our ego. We have to drop our attachments to what it looks like or what it is in order to actually make it be, bring it into being and make it manifest.
We might begin by just noticing the thought that's there. And then we might ask ourselves the question, who's aware of this thought right now? What's that awareness that's there? And then settling into that space of awareness that's behind the thoughts that's behind the sensations, that's behind the sounds that are there, it's behind all the external stimuli that's occurring in that moment, and begin deeply listening to what's actually here in this present moment right now. And what we might be able to do by deeply listening is at times hear these very subtle whispers that are coming through, telling us what's the most skillful direction to go into right now, or with ideas or inspirations that are going to help guide our next moment.
When we talk about changing, we need to remember that that's not just a do, not just a list of, oh, well, I want this and I want this and I want this, but it's a changing the way we are, the way we be. Whatever it is that knows how to heal a cut finger, whatever that part is, does a great job of what it's doing. If we can learn to listen to that more and trust more, then we know how to be more. And our doing will become much better, much wiser, much better for the planet and for us.
I think that every creative act is a healing act. Every form of creation is healing or teaching, or healing and teaching. And when people allow themselves to bring through whatever their creative expression is, we are contributing to our planet, contributing to the world in a way that allows people to receive something from it that either soothes them or awakens them or engages them in an act of their own curiosity. And I think that that is a real service.
I feel a lot more complete when I am doing things for others as well as myself. It's like a greater good. It just feels right. And it's a similar thing with spiritual practice too, is that I might feel fine, I might feel, say, enlightened or whatever, but if people around me are suffering, my work's not finished. You know, then how to help them in a way that doesn't rob them of the power.
We have powers of healing and creating in us that are beyond belief. And if we trust that and let it guide us, we'll touch souls and hearts to help them also ignite their spirit and their creativity.
The self desires both freedom and connectedness. And you know, connectedness is having that feeling of being at home. But freedom is the part of like losing yourself. And I've heard, you know, that term, the zone. We've all heard that term, the zone. And I think when you're doing your creative work, you're in a zone that's timeless. And again, spiritual teachers talk about this, the timelessness, where there isn't past, present, and future, where you are so fully in the moment and so engaged.
You step into that space of awareness that's there. You're popping out of the routine of everyday life, and you're opening up to a vast reservoir of the wonders that are here right now, which feed our creativity.
I think the state of flow is that at which one is sort of on an autopilot with respect to one's own plans, so you're not actively trying to do anything, you're just doing it. At the same time, all the information is pouring in from the outside world without you having to pay attention to it.
One of the ways to get into the flow is to let yourself be an allower, let yourself be an acceptor of life. Life isn't hard, life isn't awesome, life is.
To see this world as it really is, as a world that is open, that appears to be rich in all of its perfection, a world that has no sense of time, that is in essence eternity. In essence, it is a world in which absolute fearlessness prevails.
If Leonardo da Vinci or Michelangelo or Beethoven would have said, oh, it's not good enough, or it shouldn't be like this, it should be like this. And if they restricted themselves or limited themselves or didn't share their creation with the world because they were afraid of rejection or afraid of criticism, the world would have been the poorer for it. We would have been robbed of all those beautiful things. So the most important thing is for us to get out of our own way, really get out of our own way, and just for the sheer enjoyment or curiosity, get into that creative act.